Hey folks, if you enjoy the show and you want to help us make more videos, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Okay, thanks. Bye. Love you.
We interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Show, starring Courage, the Cowardly Dog!
I think it wasn't until I started getting classed as an anxious person did Courage the Cowardly Dog start to sink in personally. Growing up, I loved it for its overtly absurdist nature and the implication of threat as opposed to direct on-screen violence that Tom and Jerry, Ren and Stimpy, and well, almost what every other cartoon was doing at the time. No kids show scared me more than Courage if you exclude Are You Afraid of the Dark, and a lot of that was thanks to it being one of the first forms of entertainment to leave such a massive gaping hole of disclosure and ambiguity surrounding its horror and meaning. It really came to define my taste in art and entertainment. It generally had bittersweet conclusions that tackled themes that become more prevalent and profound as you get older, hence the sudden urge to make this video, but it wasn't afraid to genuinely attempt to disturb its young audience with imagery that was just outright unpleasant. For a show labelled as the stuff of kids' nightmares, it had a lot of heart to it, and that's because creator John Dilworth subverted most children's television themes at the time. It had a lot of the same structure of every other cartoon in the late 90s, early 2000s, and its animation is seeped in early traditions such as the work of Tex Avery and Bob Clampett. But for kids, it was an introduction to more complex forms of art like Salvador Dali. Dilworth was a fan of surrealist and experimental art, mostly because it had a deep-rooted significance to the artist and in turn could communicate complex feelings to the viewer. Mixing art styles is a method usually viewed with weary eyes in the world of animation, but Courage didn't stick purely to a singular format. It played with live action, photorealism, stop motion, and 3D computer animation, which at the turn of the millennium was still a relatively new innovation that big budget studios like Disney and DreamWorks were still trying to perfect. The nature of Courage's style is rather a paradox. Sure, Ren and Stimpy threw out grisly imagery, but John Dilworth's style was much more distinctive than anything I remember at the time, mainly because it wasn't always so overtly cartoony, and the surprising amount of subtlety was genuinely unsettling at times. Courage was going for scares, not laughs. Sure, it was funny, but it was complementary to the horror that predominantly took center stage to it all. For example, as much as Eustace is the most vile and despicable character on the show, I never took joy in him getting his comeuppance because I was so disturbed by the implication of what a monster would do to you, and the outcome always left my imagination wondering about his suffering at the hands of each creature. I never found it funny in an ironic way because some episodes ended with the lingering uncertainty that things will probably never go back to normal like they do in every other cartoon. The show always used the reset button, but I remember the first season's finale, The Great Facility, where Courage is unable to save Eustace and Muriel, quite jarring as a kid. Both Eustace and Muriel are turned into puppets, resulting in Courage trying to maintain the status quo by mimicking their personalities, which, when I look at it now, is deeply unnerving. I think this can go way over some kid's head, and I'm pretty sure I was in that group to begin with, but Courage's failure to save the day and meet the hero's quota completely skews the emotional schematic of a kid's cartoon. The viewer is left with the absence of resolution that impacts their perception of life finding a way of going back to normal. For me, it was an introduction to life's unpredictability, and the realization that not everything has a perfect ending. I mean, there's no doubt that Courage the Cowardly Dog is a tragedy. He loses his parents before his very eyes, he does most of the hard labor around the house, he's traumatized by Eustace, suffers deep psychological stress, and he's completely alone in all of this. But the show isn't cynical, it never makes a point of showing that life is hard and you have to suck it up. More so, Courage's bravery is subtle in the context of most cartoons, but it's infinitely more significant in the context of his world. It's very clear both narratively and stylistically what Courage the Cowardly Dog is about. It's imperfection. As I said, the horror that carries the show is all effective through the use of animation and illustration, but it wasn't so much just technique, but rather the rejection of a specific animation principle. The show sacrificed appeal in favor of grotesque design. The color palette lacks harmony, the characters are disproportionate, and generally speaking, most stylistic choices are entirely inconsistent with each other. But really, it serves to reinforce that there is no such thing as perfection. There is no completeness, closure, or even absolute normality, but that's something people need to embrace rather than reject. I say this in many videos, but before Inside Out did anything, Courage the Cowardly Dog declared bold and bluntly that it was okay to be scared in this overwhelming, unpredictable world. In fact, the more abstract fear gets, the more human and rational our understanding of it becomes. Whereas a lot of shows were teaching safe moral lessons, Courage instead taught us that not everything needs a clear, definitive answer for it to make sense. The sooner we embrace ambiguity, the easier it is to come to terms with life's tragic and even positive circumstances and mysteries. A prime example of this is found in the last episode of the series run entitled Perfect, where a strange tutor called the Perfectionist arrives to teach, or rather force, Courage to get good. This episode really hits home for a lot of people because it highlights the fallacy of teaching kids lessons. This tutor is supposed to inspire and encourage personal development, but she absolutely berates him for simple mistakes and projects that there's a right and wrong way around everything, which, creatively speaking, isn't the case. In primary elementary school, I had teachers that would get frustrated with me for making basic mistakes, and rather than learn from those mistakes, the negative response internalized my own fear of failure. My anxiety is entirely driven by social rejection for making a mistake, and this effectively manifests perfectionism, which is a whole lot more than simply wanting to be right all the time. Perfectionism is an obsession, an itch that never goes away, and instead of feeling satisfaction, you become oppressed by your own insecurities that make you feel constantly judged and scrutinized by others, and thus causes more mistakes in the process. The perfectionist's character can only be seen by Courage, thus it reinforces the theory that she's entirely a manifestation of Courage's insecurity, triggered by his own awareness for his mistakes and the lack of support to help rectify them. And the constant harassment by Eustace, who has attached labels of stupid and dumb to Courage that have become a self-fulfilling prophecy, thus creating a sense of defeat. You meet people in life that just outright shoot you down for no reason, and it's not them shooting you down that internalizes fear or doubt, it's not understanding why. And really, that was the point of Courage. Sometimes there isn't a reason. Bad things just exist, but as long as you stay true to your own values and hold on to those dearest to you, bad things will never break you. Hence, the manipulative and arrogant villains help reinforce this idea, as Courage is always attempting to overcome personalities that simply want to put him down, both figuratively and literally. It plays directly into the irony of his name. He's a coward, but just trying is enough to constitute his own bravery. This episode, I feel perfectly within context, captures the essence of what the show is. The conflict comes seemingly out of nowhere, there's a totally helpless, isolated feeling to Courage's situation, and the use of animation styles helps reinforce the horror. At night, Courage has multiple nightmares that are accentuated by different styles. We have claymation, 2D animatic, that early CD-ROM look, and the creepiest of them all, CGI.
You're not perfect.
The different styles symbolizes the complexity of our thoughts and nightmares by using visuals to heighten the viewer's awareness of Courage's detachment from comfort and normality. But how does he confront his fear? Well, he's simply reminded of his own inner beauty and expressing something that is perfect to him, regardless of what others think. I don't believe Dilworth wanted to give viewers answers to their problems, but rather he sought to empathize with them and help them to grow purely by understanding that they weren't suffering their own ordeals alone. We get shows about sadness and happiness, but we rarely see kids shows tackle a broad sense of life's confusing journey. Not everything can be intellectualized, and we don't always want to be reminded of how chaotic life can get. But ultimately, Courage is an embrace into accepting the absurdity of personal conflicts, and how they're all just one massive piece of our existence, and the reality that no matter what happens, life goes on, whether or not you become a skeleton. Hey folks, thanks for watching. I've been quite sick, but I thought I'd put my face to a camera just to say thank you for helping me surpass over 100,000 subscribers. That is the craziest thing I've probably said on camera ever in my life, and I've said some really dumb stuff before. Thanks to my patrons especially for their requests. Because of that, I now have my schedule going into October for Halloween, which by now on Patreon you will already know what those videos will be, and I will be announcing them tomorrow or tonight. Well, I'll be announcing them via Twitter, so head over to Twitter if you have an account there, do so. And until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye!